Greetings, welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Gracie Kunadu. When I was young, little boy, probably around 7, 8 years old, I used to go to this golf course located across the street from the community where I lived. And some of you might know this already, but for those of you, most of you who don't, I lived in a community called Cassava Peace, and this was located by this gully, the bank of this gully, at least on the left side of the gully. And that's where I was raised. My grandfather, my mother, my aunts, my younger brother, and my sister. And so in that community, we're very close in community for the most part. I remember, for example, getting in trouble with my mom's friend, and sure, she scolded me, disciplined me. And by the time I got home, my mom already, received the news. Now, I was amazed by it, still amazed by it, because I don't know how she knew what went on before I got home and before her friend got home to tell her. In those days, there were no cell phones or beepers. And so, anyway, I got in trouble again with my mom. So that's how close the community was in terms of the sort of, web of connections and relationships between people. That said, I used to seek out answers to my questions about this big people world as a young person, as a small person in this world. And because I couldn't necessarily go to my mother, or at least I didn't feel that way, or go to my grandfather, though I loved and respected him, there was always a certain kind of place reserved for children. And so, typically stayed in that place for the most part. And so I would travel, out of this community, walk about maybe 7 minutes, and cross this main street on Constant Spring Road. And then right across the street, that particular road, was this golf course, Constant Spring Golf Course. And it is apparently a main attraction in, that part of Kingston, Jamaica. And I remember just going through this cutout, area in the fence. This was a sort of wired fence, probably about 8 or 9 feet high, but there was a part that was cut out, and I used to essentially, walk through that area, and I used to stay not far from it, just watching, everyone and everything on the golf course. In fact, the golf course, it was my other world. It was my library. It was my classroom. Learned a lot about the world on that golf course, and so I would ask my questions, and I would just sit there and reflect, things that were important to me. And as a 7-year-old, I knew that I was, different than other children, because I found other children to be boring. I found their games to be boring. In my head, 7 years old, 8 years old, I'm saying that they're childish, either arrogance or hubris, or neither. In either case, I would take, my things that I thought were important to me, sort of the big questions about people, society, why is things this way? Why do the people who I don't see go to work, in sun and rain, cutting sugarcane, cleaning the streets, cleaning the bed sheets in the hotels? These were the white folks that would essentially always be at the golf course. Now, mind you, I had an aunt, biological father's side, who worked at the golf course. And so sometimes I would see her, and she used to always be serving these, white folks, whatever, drinks, food, you name it. And something struck me about that relationship between, these kinds of people, these people who are people of African ancestry, domiciled or settled, in this island called Jamaica, and these other folks, whether they're born in Jamaica or from abroad, these white folks who, it's something that seemed wrong. Now, I didn't have the word for white supremacy or racism or inequity, but I knew something was inherently wrong about that relationship. And I knew it was a power relationship because of what I saw outside of the golf course, right? That these people driving these cars, these people, I never saw them work. I didn't see them, doing any of the work that I saw the other, people of African ancestry doing. And so I chalked it up as, something's not right about this relationship, something not right about this situation. Now, come to find out much later, as I became a young adult, I found more evidence, for these early questions. But these weren't the only questions that animated me. I had other questions about just nature, but the animals, why they're there, why these one, not others. I had questions about myself, that I pondered there. And so, in short, the golf course was a very important place to me. Now, I want to make one thing clear to distinguish what the golf course meant for me and what your golf course might mean for you. And so the golf course wasn't an escape. In other words, I knew that I lived across the street in that community called Cassava Peace. I knew, where my family and friends were, and they were as real to me as anything. And so this wasn't a matter of trying to escape that world. It just gave me a place to breathe. In fact, I often remind my students, my college students that is, the reason why they're, or major reason why they're in my classroom, besides whatever interest they may have or the requirement it may satisfy, the major reason why they're in my classroom is because they haven't figured it out yet. And that it being, what is it that they are and should be about in this lifetime. And so because they haven't figured out, I said, well, college is a sort of reprieve. It gives you, a safe place to bleed, and it gives you a time and a space to reflect, and to get some things answered. And that's what the golf course was to me. And we all have our golf course. We may not call it so, we may not refer to it so, but we all have that place where we go to, just find some solace, just to find some, some grace, just to find some reprieve, a break. I remember, James Baldwin saying something like this. It won't be an exact quote, but it's close enough, that those, on the front lines who are always fighting against those isms, racism, white supremacy, all the other isms that are there, that they don't have a time to rest, right? And this is very important because whenever you're in a battle or you're in a war, whether it's a war of attrition or simply a war, without an end in sight, whatever the battle of war may be, and we all have our battles, right? We all have our wars that we wage daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. And in those battles, in those wars, often the soldiers will get a chance to rest. But this is why, precisely why in war, and I'm going to bring the metaphor back to the golf course, we need to have our own barracks. We need to have our own base, right? Because the base allows you a chance to regroup, re-strategize, to think things through, or to essentially go through the scenarios to figure out, the way ahead or the way in front, of you and how to proceed best, doing the best you can with the resources you have, given where you are and who you are, and what you have to work with. And so these are sort of the questions, at least the miniature-sized versions of them, that the golf course, afforded me. It gave me that, that other non-critical, non-judgmental, space just to look at things and to figure things out, in this world that I was a part of, that I was growing in. And because I was very precocious, I had a lot of questions and still have a lot of questions that drive me today, perhaps just like you. We all need to have, therefore, our golf course. We all need to have that particular place. Now, for some of us, we may not have a physical place that we go to. So the golf course may be someplace inside, right? Or the golf course may be music. In fact, that's what music does to me. In fact, I write, I read, I study to music, right? I clean to music. And so music for me is also that safe place where it just takes me somewhere, that is, a source, of sort of renewal, a source of regeneration, a source for regrouping and again re-strategizing and sort of figuring things out, right? And so one of the qualities that I find very admirable, in people in general, adults or children, and certainly in myself, it is the ability to try. I love people who are trying because it means that they are fighting, they're battling. And these people who are trying have not resigned, have not given up, have not yielded to whatever the forces and figures that there are in the world in which they live. They, in a sense, have found, a morsel or a portion of a golf course that they can go to, because we all need to have that. We all. Because a soldier that fights without, a place to retreat and regroup is a soldier who is a dead man walking. In other words, he or she may still be alive in physical body, but in their spirit and their soul and in their emotions, they're basically a corpse, right? Because we all need that. And here's the test that you can easily, look at yourself and figure it out for yourself, that most of us, if not all human beings, if we don't get sufficient amount of rest, not sleep, but rest, right? We are cranky, we are bitter, we're angry, we're easy to frustrate. We lose our patience if we ever had any. And so this is what that rest means, right? This is what that golf course means. It's our place, to recharge, our place to, think things through in a way that perhaps we didn't, because human beings are emotional beings, which means we often rush into a decision or situation that is based on an emotional impulse rather than something that is actually, thought through, or that has sufficient reflection to figure out, okay, these are the possibilities that if I choose door A, door B, or door C, and what are the consequences of each, and am I willing to bear them? Now, there is no guarantee that what you come up with will come out exactly, but at least, in your spirit and your soul, you'll be somewhat prepared for a type of consequence that may happen, right? And that comes from having your own golf course. So for all you out there that have your golf course, or whatever you may call it, big up to you. And for those that don't have one, please find a safe place. In fact, one of the best places to start, which is, by the way, a key important point of therapy, which is this, is that find a tree that is close to where you live or close to a very green space, park, you name it, and hug the tree. What you do essentially is transfer your, ill feelings, your anxiety, your stress, your anger onto the tree. In the same way that trees transfer or produce and then transfer their, waste, which is oxygen for us, and we essentially provide, our waste, and they absorb it. Likewise, trees too absorb, our anxiety, our stress, and other kinds of negative factors, in our being. And so, hug a tree, hug several trees, actually, throughout the day, throughout the week, and even periodically. And that transference is part of that charge. And so, if you are in a place where you don't have a golf course or don't have something like it, find a tree and let that be your golf course, right? If you have one in your backyard, even better. If you don't have a backyard, you can find one in a local park or someplace that has trees that are green, and not one that is withered out or in a state that is not alive, but at least one that you can actually put your arms around, and hug a tree. Let that be a safe place. Of course, there are other ways to get to nature, but if that is your only way, then do so. For Powered by Nyame, I've been your guide and host. Until next time, kindly drop your questions, comments in the section below, your experiences, and all the best in finding and maintaining your golf course. Stay well.